Megan here from Crystal Lake Public Library Adult Services. So it's March and I want to show you a couple of recipes. I'm putting up a recipe for a traditional Irish soda bread, but today I'm going to show you how to make your own rye bread so you can make some wonderful sandwiches or just enjoy rye bread. So this is again from the Bread Bible, which is a book that I own, which I love and has many, many great recipes in it. So this is for Levy's Real Jewish Rye Bread. So the bread starts with a starter, and it's not like a sourdough starter. It's one you make fresh, and it's liquid. You whisk it together, and then you mix additional flour and you sprinkle that on the top, and then you let this starter not really ferment, but it's the same idea. So you let it sit for 1 to 4 hours, or you can let it sit for 1 hour on the counter and then you put it in the fridge and you finish the bread the next day, and that just really gives it a more depth of flavor. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start today, and then I'll put it in the fridge after an hour, and then we'll do the second part the next day. So to start my dough starter, you take 3/4 of a cup of bread flour, which I never use, but it is great. I always just use all-purpose because it's a lot easier to get. So I'm going to measure that into my mixing bowl, my big deep mixing bowl. It does rise and get high, so use a nice deep bowl. And if you have a stand mixer, that's the best. It is possible to do this bread by hand. It just takes a lot of elbow grease because it's a big, thick, heavy dough and you have to knead it for about 10 minutes. But I've done both ways and it's great both ways. It's just a little more work if you do it by hand. So you take 3/4 a cup of flour, bread flour or all-purpose, and then 3/4 of a cup of rye flour. And you can use dark or light rye. Either one, it works just fine. So you measure that right on top. And I have the rest of the ingredients here. And we'll keep these flours because we're going to be adding them after. So then you need instant yeast, which I keep in my little jar in the fridge. This part of the recipe calls for 1/2 teaspoon. So if you get the active dry yeast envelopes, just measure it out with a measuring spoon. So 1/2 teaspoon now. 1.5 tablespoons of sugar. And the options in the recipe are for malt powder, barley malt syrup, or honey. Or if you don't have honey, do sugar. Or if you can't have honey, do sugar. I never find those extra ingredients. I just use honey. I like how it tastes, and it's simple because I always have it on hand. And that's going to be 1/2 a tablespoon. Sometimes I double this recipe because it's nice to have an extra loaf stashed in the freezer. But today this recipe is just the traditional as it's written recipe. So to that you add 1.5 cups of water, and it's between 70 and 90 degrees. So if you have a thermometer of any kind, you can test that, or you can do it by touch. It's just gently warmed water. So we're going to pour that right in, and it's thick. It's like pancake batter at this point. And so give that a nice whisk, get lots of air incorporated in. And kind of pull down the little bits from the side. And then we're going to add a little flour on the top. So the part that goes, the flour mixture that goes on top is 2 1/4 cups of the bread flour. And instant yeast again, half of a teaspoon. So if you're getting the packets, you do need to measure it out. Don't just pour the whole packet in because I think it's 2 1/4 in each little envelope. So use your measuring spoon for that. And then we're gonna add to this the caraway seeds and the salt. So some of her recipes you add the salt when you're mixing, but this one we're gonna do it in the pre-ferment. So let me grab my caraway seeds. So caraway seeds for this recipe, it's gonna be 2 tablespoons. Measure those out and put them in the flour mixture. And a half a tablespoon of salt. And then you give this just a little stir together so everything's incorporated. And then you sprinkle it right on top of that very wet mixture. And it doesn't have to be perfect. So you just want it covering all of the wet mixture. And from this point, you want to set a timer for an hour and either get a tea towel or plastic wrap and cover it right on top. Set it aside in your kitchen in a non-drafty, warmish place and wait for that timer to go off, and then I'll show you what's next. So we have our rye bread, our starter that we put overnight in the fridge. Well, that's what I chose to do. You can just put this on the counter for 1 hour and then take it out and proceed, but I like to start it the night before. So this is the starter, and from this point you're going to need your mixer, or if you prefer to do it by hand, it's a lot of work by hand because it's about 10 minutes of kneading this dough. So you're going to put 2 tablespoons of oil, drizzle it right over the top, and then with the dough hook you're going to knead this for right around 10 minutes until it gets nice and bouncy when you touch it and your finger doesn't sink in. So I'll show you after you knead for 10 minutes, then you're going to put it back in the bowl, press it down, maybe do a little spray on the top, cover with a cloth or plastic wrap, and then you're going to leave it out to rise for about 1 hour. So I'll meet you back here after that hour to show you the next couple steps. Hi, so I have let my dough rise, and if you see it's nice and big and puffy, and it springs back if you gently touch it. So this dough rises 3 times. So we've done our first. Our second rise, the instructions say, she calls it giving it a business letter turn, which was new to me. So we get the dough out onto a floured surface, and it's a little sticky, so I think I'll just do a slight sprinkle of flour. And you're going to take the sides, press them down, and then take the other sides and bring them in. So you're getting out some of that air. And you return this, you can respray your rising bowl, and then we'll bring that back in. And we let this rise less this time. The first rise for me was about 1.5 hours. It's supposed to double in height. So this second rise can be anywhere from 45 minutes to as long as it takes in your kitchen. I'm gonna let this rise and check back in about 45 minutes. So I've let my dough rise for the second time, and I've doubled the recipe, so that's why I have this giant piece of dough. For me, I'm gonna cut it in half, and the recipe actually calls for this to be baked in a bowl, but I like mine in a bread pan, so then I can slice it and easily put it in my toaster. So for each loaf, you're gonna flatten it out, and again, bring in the sides, kind of squeeze any of those air bubbles out, and seal this together, and just roughly shape it into a loaf. It doesn't have to look perfect because it's going to get another rise, so the shape is going to change. Then we'll place that in a pre-greased loaf pan and do the same for the second. And then you'll take either your cover, whatever you use to cover your bowl while it was rising. I use a tea towel, and we'll cover those for the same about 45 minutes. While that is rising, you're going to preheat the oven. It calls for a really long preheat. So you're going to preheat the oven to 450 about an hour before you're going to bake. So you can set these on the oven as it warms, just placing something over the top just so the bread dough doesn't dry out. Another thing to mention, when you preheat the oven, you're going to want the rack on the lowest place it can go in your oven. And if you have a pizza stone, you can put that in and put these right on top of the pizza stone to cook. But the biggest thing is to make sure that that rack is at the bottom, because you don't want to be messing around with that once the oven is 450 degrees. Okay, so I'll show you what this looks like when it's all ready to go in, and then once it comes out as well. So I've let my dough, my shaped dough, rise. So the last step before you put it in the oven is doing a nice mark. It says to use a razor blade. I never have a good razor blade, so I use a sharp knife. And this is kind of up to you how you want to design it. You can put some straight lines through. You could do a cross, or you can choose to not do anything at all. It's up to you. But this is part of the recipe just to make it fun and interesting. And if you have cornmeal, you could sprinkle a little cornmeal on top to make it a little more authentic. So once your oven is ready and hot, we're gonna pop that in, and it bakes for about 45 minutes. When you, let's see, after 15 minutes, put the oven down to 400 degrees and then cook it for another 30. And I will show you what it looks like when it's all out and done and crusty and beautiful. So here is my bread. Unfortunately, my family got to it before I could record a video, but this is what it looks. It's a nice tall rise, and we've sliced in, and you can see there's nice caraway seeds throughout. And I like to use this serrated knife and get a nice thick slice. I like it toasted best, and in the book, Rose talks about that her grandmother's favorite way to serve this was toasted with butter and sliced radishes and sprinkled with salt. So give that a try and let me know what you think of this rye bread recipe. Thank you.